Welcome everyone to this Chaplain York webinar focusing on fundraising from Switzerland. My name is Heather Hill. I'm the head of international philanthropy for Chaplain York. And with me today is Nancy Bikson, the managing director of Chaplain York, as well as Lior, Renous, who is our executive director of our Chaplain York Switzerland Foundation. So I will pass it off to Nancy to get us started here. But just want to say that as you have questions throughout, please feel free to put them into the chat. We'll have time for Q&A at the end of the webinar. So as those questions are put into the chat, we'll make sure that we get to all of those at the end. As well as during the Q&A time, you can also come off mute and ask questions live. But with that, I will pass it to Nancy.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you all for coming. We really hope that this is a very useful opportunity for you to find out what really fundraising from your, from Switzerland, either your own alumni or other stakeholders or new people that you identify, whatever it is that interests you about Switzerland, that this is a really practical opportunity for you. Usually I get to say something about the tax and legal things in a country and everybody goes, oh dear. But this time, I don't need to because Lior is our expert. And all I really want to say, besides welcoming you all on behalf of Chaplain York, as Heather has done, and to just ensure that you really do please let us ensure that we give you what you want. So don't not ask a question, don't worry about it. Anything that you want to know, this is your opportunity. Is when we were setting up our Swiss foundation, I was really, we sort of thought we knew what we were doing. Everybody knows Switzerland, it's got a lot of mountains, it's got a lot of, it's Geneva's pretty international, Zurich is pretty business orientated, that sort of thing. And when I met Lior and we really started talking about Switzerland, was when I really understood how little I knew about the actual workings of Switzerland in the philanthropic sector. How did people feel about it? What was philanthropy like in Switzerland? What was the nonprofit sector like in Switzerland? How do people, we know what the Americans think, we know what the Brits think, we know, how do people in Switzerland? Now that may make a huge difference of who you're talking to, because if you've got a donor or you've got somebody who's moved from your country to Switzerland, it means you've got two things you're thinking about, is their original country and the culture they bring with them, plus the country that they found themselves in. So that makes it even doubly interesting in terms of trying to find the right thing of how you're thinking about it. But I get to be quiet, so you don't really want to hear from me. You want to hear from Lior because she is the expert. And it really, and I guess I just want to impart how much I learned about what Switzerland's really like and what somebody outside Switzerland needs to know about the place. And I hope that after the next hour, you'll walk away feeling that way as well. So with absolutely nothing else that I need to add or should add to this, may I turn over to Lior and to Heather, please.
Thank you, Nancy, very much. After that kind of entrance and kind of introduction, I am worried to start speaking, but I think we can cover most of the things that are really interesting when you want to look into Switzerland as a place where we want to fundraise. So I'll start with, hi, good day, depending on where you are, if it's morning, afternoon, or evening, and thank you for joining us today. And I'm kind of excited to discuss with you Switzerland from the philanthropic lens. So, maybe a short beginning is to talk about how Switzerland is home to 139 billion Swiss francs in philanthropic assets. So we're not talking about a small market. This is a country that has favorable tax policies, and we'll go into them as we go. A really strong culture of giving, and it really is a bit of an ideal place for funding. So we're gonna try and kind of look and explore this landscape a little bit here, but if you just wanna touch on it as a beginning and you're not active in Switzerland yet, or even if you already have some funders in Switzerland, there's always room to grow. So the areas which we're going to touch on today is the types of fundings and funders in the Swiss landscape, the cultural nuances in Switzerland, the legal and tax landscape. Depending on the time we have, we might also get to talk about the thematic landscapes in Switzerland. Because we have quite a bit to cover, I suggest that if we have questions while I'm talking and kind of touching on these subjects, you can put them in the chat, and Heather here will help me kind of moderate it. And if it's in the thematic, we can kind of touch on it. And then anything that we don't get to go into, we will have, like Heather said, and Nancy will have time for discussions and questions at the end to really kind of go into what is interesting and very, very practical for you guys. So let's start with, generally how Swiss philanthropic landscape looks like. So we have our foundations, our corporations, our high net worth individuals, and even the public sector funding holds significant amount of power here. So if we break it down, let's start with private foundations. There are over 13,000 foundations registered in Switzerland. Foundations here tend to focus on international causes. So that is, good news for all of us. And their priority areas often align with the SDGs. I will kind of touch on it as we go, but this is something important in terms of the language in which a lot of the foundations speak here. So in general, if we're working on issues such as health, education, inequality, climate action with SDG language in it, it's a quite natural fit within the Swiss landscape within private foundations. Next, we have corporate philanthropy. Now, Swiss companies take CSR, corporate social responsibility, quite seriously. Often they focus on issues like sustainability and healthcare. We see, again, SDGs come into play here, and that's key to some of these companies, especially aligning their philanthropy with their business value. So if we pitch to a Swiss company, it's important for us to connect the project to something that resonates with their brand and with their mission. What's important to also know about the corporate philanthropy here, it's not as developed as maybe some other markets around the world. Even though Switzerland is home to really big international corporations that have branches here with robust CSR, most of the economy in Switzerland is medium-sized companies. So that means we have quite a large section of maturity levels for different companies. So it kind of gives a place for more discussions for new CSR practice versus really old and developed one. It's something that over the last 10 years really have kind of bloomed within here, but it's not as strong as some other countries where CSR is second nature. The third is individual donors, right? High net worth individuals are a major force in Swiss philanthropy. These donors are particularly interested in social justice, gender equality, and poverty reductions. Those are the big ones, but it's important to note that there is, as many individuals there are kind of many areas which they like to invest in. And they also tend to be a lot more involved in the projects they support. They want to see the impact, they want to personally engage, they want to build a relationship, and relationship building is really key. And they also, most of the time, don't actually enjoy giving one-time donations. So it is about fostering long-term partnerships and about giving for long-term. So we discuss, in our area in nonprofits about how to get donors that are invested in long-term. And this is something we'll go into the culture here as well, that it's really prevalent in the Swiss marketplace. Sorry. Lastly, we have the public sector and government funding. So they're not as large as the other two groups, but they are really important, especially in areas like peace building, international development, and partnerships. We're talking about SDG 16 and SDG 17. 16 focus on promoting peace, 17 highlights the importance of partnerships. There could be opportunities here, and depending on where, they can sometimes function as an entryway to other donor groups. So getting specific government and public sector funding will then open you to networks and other donors, which they will bring to the table. So that's a bit about the landscape. Not incredibly different, but there are some nuances that are different kind of from other countries around the world. So if we're looking into the cultural aspects of giving in Switzerland, there's kind of, I think around, we can say 5 that are the key to success in the Swiss market. The first of them is discretion. So if there's one thing you need to know about Swiss philanthropists, is they prefer to give quietly. There is a strong culture of discretion. Public recognition or large-scale publicity is not really the norm here. Swiss donors value privacy. So when you're engaging with them, it's important to respect that and know that instead of coming with a big PR campaign, we're talking personalized one-on-one connections. Discretion is also the reason why some foundations and some individuals will not have online presence. You will not know that they're given. The second one is long-term commitment. So like we said before, it's one of the things that makes Switzerland really attractive landscape for nonprofit, and it's something that is very important. So they have a reputation for being in it for the long haul. They're not interested in short-term projects, something that fizzles after a few months or something that kind of is, the scope is very, very limited. They're looking for long-term partnerships and they want to see sustainable impact. So when we approach Swiss funders, we need to emphasize how the project will create lasting change and what are the abilities to build on that partnership and continue to work together. The third one is the focus on neutrality and global peace. Now, there are some areas in which neutrality is not such a high value, but with historical culture within Switzerland, it's famous for its neutrality. And this philosophy kind of carries over to the philanthropic effort. So they're very focused on issues like humanitarian aid and conflict resolution and international development, with keeping that kind of neutrality and global peace in mind. So those kinds of issues have very much a sympathetic audience, and it's very much part of the Swiss culture. The fourth area is the community and regional focus. So we said that Swiss Philanthropy supports a lot of global causes, and they do. They do a lot of global philanthropy, but there's also a really strong focus on local and regional projects. And these are usually projects that kind of have sort of a sister or a twin within the other global facing projects. So the projects are usually very strongly tied with Swiss values and traditions. So it's good to keep in mind that if you were to work in Switzerland, finding a local connection, whether it's an organization, whether it's a person, whether it's a community, can be very, very helpful. And then the fifth and maybe final thing around kind of the special cultural points of Switzerland is ethical giving. So Swiss philanthropy are very, very close to the entire subject of ethics. The donors want to know where their money is being used. They want transparency. They want sustainable and ethical change. they're quite selective. So having a clear ethical framework can really help. Now, when we're saying transparency, we're not talking about the type of donors that really want to know what you're doing with every cent. It's not that type of transparency. It's not huge reports. Of course, there's all types of donations, but that is not the significant cultural part. That is less what most are looking for. What they're looking for is within that partnership area, is the fact that there is transparency. This is going not so great. This is hard for us. This is an area in which we're struggling. We're very transparent in how things go. I think, you know, we saw it throughout COVID when there were a lot of funding changes in the world, and then even afterwards. There are demographic, the funders here that are, even though they like their structure, because of the amount of transparency and partnerships, can understand changing your goals within your partnerships if something needs to be shifted. But they would not tolerate so much trying to kind of smooth talk them into like, oh, this is going great, when it's not. So they're very building a strong ethical framework more than like the detailed nitty-gritty reporting or nitty-gritty kind of information. That's something that's more valuable culturally within the philanthropic sector. So that kind of leads to kind of a bit of a side note, but not really, which is the core to how reach these philanthropic actors within Switzerland. And it's all about networks and personal connections. So if I can give one piece of advice when it comes to Swiss fundraising, it's all about relationships, building strong personal connections with funders is really crucial. So we're not even talking about brand connections. We're talking about personal connections. So Swiss donors, whether they're foundations, corporations, individuals, or even institutional funders, they really, really value building the trust between and kind of having that deep personal connections. So cold emails, mass solicitations don't really get very far in Switzerland. You're also not going to get usually to the donors that you want to get to. So focusing strategically on building relationships will be much more fruitful. So it means that the entire strategic approach to Swiss philanthropy kind of needs to focus there. So if we're thinking about mass emails, what would be the other side for that? That would be an in-person gala. So you're getting, or event. It doesn't have to be a gala if you're not raising money there, or event. It means that the in-person is important because you get to meet people face to face. You see a face, you build a partnership that way. The mass email won't get you anywhere. The event or the gala or however you want to frame it will. And if we take it another step, instead of creating an event or a gala alone, fostering a connection, a partnership with someone that has a network in Switzerland, that resides here, works here, does projects or philanthropy here, and then joining them, doing something with them, or joining one of the many, many, many network and thematic global events that happen mostly around Geneva, Basel, and Zurich would be far more productive than anything else. So being in person, even if it's for a short while for the first introduction, or having a facilitator, someone that knows someone that can then get you within the network, is hugely more valuable than anything else. So yes, this can take time, but once you build trust, you're far more likely to secure long-term support. And once you secure long-term support with one, the community, even though it's large, because of the culture of giving, has a bit of a knock-on effect that unlocks additional funding. So once you get into one, you then unlock others through the trust and support you have from your first kind of network connection. So this is about, how to really work within Switzerland. If we're talking, I see we have no questions, so we can keep on going. If we're talking about the legal and tax framework of philanthropy within Switzerland, I think there are three main key points that we can talk about it. The Swiss tax law offers really generous deductions for charitable donations. So usually it's up to 20% federally. This creates a really strong incentive for individuals and corporations to give. It is important to note that Switzerland is a confederation, which means it's divided to cantons, and cantons have very strong legal structures. So even though we have federal law, canton law will, in these cases, most of the time, overwrite federal law. So changes to tax law can be done on the specific cantonal level. But we're talking generally most cantons abide by this rule, but it's important to kind of note that the canton we're going to, where our funders are, where our partners are, laws can change and can change on their own timelines because they each have independent governance. The second thing is, for nonprofits, having tax-exempt status is a really big benefit. First of all, the tax-exempt status gives the ability for their donations to be tax deductible. So it's not tax deductible if it's not given to a nonprofit, and it needs to be a nonprofit that is recognized within Switzerland. So not only it gives kind of that tax deductible ability, but because it's within the Swiss system, and as we said, it's a culture based on trust and based on transparency, they also tend to give quite a lot of credibility once you have a tax-exempt status. So it signals credibility. It makes you more attractive to donors and potential donors from tax landscape, but as well as you being part of the system, being kind of one of them. And I think the third one that would be interesting here is talk about cross-border philanthropy. So the Swiss law supports cross-border philanthropy, which means that, as kind of we touched on before, the actions don't have to be done in Switzerland. There is, even though culturally there's a plus per community, regulatory, there doesn't have to be anything connected to Switzerland for an action to be tax deductible, to be recognized as a nonprofit, and for a donation to be recognized as tax deductible. So this, if you have a Swiss affiliate within Switzerland that allows you to receive the donations, there is nothing that is legally constraining you and your actions to be done anything within specific thematics or within the Swiss border. So we do see that it's a really big hub for international donations. So donations that go to international causes and actions that actually happen outside of Switzerland. So if we have time, Heather, do we have a few more minutes or should we open to questions? Yeah. Okay, so since we have a few more minutes, I will touch really briefly about the key philanthropic areas in Switzerland. Again, it's a wrap up where none of us is gonna go and say, oh, the USA, the UK, France, Hong Kong donates just to X. We know that donation and funding and funders are very diverse everywhere. But within aggregated area, and there have been a few studies done within Switzerland on this recently from the Center of Philanthropy and the University in Geneva and the University in Zurich, there's around 5 thematics that are being given to. So first of all is global health, which is SDG 3. Again, SDG language is important. On a personal note, I'm yet to find a philanthropic landscape that is so obsessed with the SDGs. Like, this is really, they love that language. So global health, SDG 3, Swiss donors focus here heavily on global health issues, and you can see it with the support of organizations like the Global Fund, Gavi, how it tackled the pandemics. It's a really big substantial issue that drives a lot of foundations to give around. The second one is humanitarian aid and crisis relief. So we're talking about the SDG 1 and SDG 16. Switzerland has a really long tradition of funding humanitarian aid with the Red Cross, and not just the Red Cross, but kind of the origin of the Red Cross kind of starting that philanthropic culture. And we see it especially in conflict zones, refugees, crisis. The third one is environmental and conservation and sustainability. This we see growing more every year. And specific local, funding coalitions kind of putting more and more resources towards it. We're talking about SDG 13 and SDG 15. And Swiss donors are really invested in environmental sustainability, particularly around climate action and biodiversity. Those are kind of the large areas which donations go to. The fourth one is education and scientific research. So this is SDG 4. Philanthropy does extend to not just general development education, but classic education and scientific research within institutes and higher academics. It is one of the top 5. And it's often done through scholarship and research grants, but not just. And the fifth one is human rights and social justice. Of course, as we know, with a lot of international organizations residing in Switzerland and the UN, we have the SDG 5 and SDG 10. And there's a lot of focus on human rights, gender equality, and reducing inequalities globally. So just to conclude, there's a lot of opportunity for nonprofits, especially if you're working within those general 5 areas. But to be successful, it's important to kind of align with Swiss priorities and the values, be open to build a partnership, act with a lot of discretion, and look for long-term commitment and an ethical framework. I think that is all. Again, I will just stress that the focus should be building strong relationship. It's the key to unlocking the trust and support of Swiss donors. And thank you very much for your time. And I think we can open for questions.
Well, actually, I wanted to just say a bit about kind of the logistics of if you are fundraising in Switzerland, but you are based in another country, which I think is the case for most on our webinar today. I wanted to offer a little bit of information about how you can facilitate tax-effective giving in that situation. So, as Lior spoke, there are tax benefits. Those do vary based on where the donors are located, but the main thing is that the donation needs to go to a Swiss charity in order for there to be a tax benefit. So if you don't have your own Swiss entity, which would be one option, you could set up a charity in Switzerland and be registered there. The other option is to work with an intermediary. So another organization that is a registered Swiss charity that can receive donations and has the ability to grant them on to you. That is something that Chapel New York offers. We actually offer both charity setup and management, and we offer the intermediary service through our global family of foundations. There are other organizations who do this as well. Essentially, the model is for the intermediary situation is that your donor would give to the intermediary. I'm going to use Chapel New York as an example. So your donor would give to the Chapel New York Switzerland Foundation. You would have a fund there set up for your organization. So say, you know, the University of the UK. I'm just making things up. Obviously, it's not a real university, but bear with me. So you have a fund for the University of the UK that is set up with the Chapel New York Switzerland Foundation. Your Swiss donor can give to your fund with the Switzerland Foundation. The Switzerland Foundation, then their board would get together, review the donations that have come in, and then approve a grant to the University of the UK accordingly. So again, it's a rather simple process. It takes all the legal and regulatory headaches away from you if you work with an intermediary. If you do set up your own entity, then you've got to have, you know, you have to go through all the registration process and the regulatory pieces. You've got to set up your banking there. You have to have a board there. So generally speaking, unless you plan on having a long-term presence or plan on being in Switzerland on a regular basis, it's probably a lot more cost-effective and efficient to work with an intermediary. But again, both options are there. And then, of course, if your donor is not interested in tax benefits, then you don't have to worry about anything. They can just give directly to you. But most donors, if there is a tax benefit available by giving to a local charity, that would be their preference. And while donors, of course, it's all about relationships, as Lior already said, that people give to people, people give for very personal reasons. The ability to offer a tax benefit can have a significant impact on the amount someone may choose to give because they're receiving the tax benefit as well. So with that, I would just open up the questions. I see we have a number of them in the chat. So see, our first question is, would a 501c3 qualify for a Swiss donor, or would it need to find a Swiss affiliate? That's really what I was just touching on. Yes, you would need to work with a Swiss charity. A US 501c3 wouldn't qualify for tax benefits for a Swiss donor. And then to be recognized as a nonprofit in Switzerland, is it necessary to set up a board there?
Yes. Yes. And depending on where, you need to have your board members, at least some, reside in Switzerland.
So then we have another question here, Lior. Someone asking, where would they find Swiss foundations? Is there a Swiss Charity Commission where there's an ability to research and view accounts and potentially contact foundations?
So,
oh, and sorry, a related question to that is, are there forums where you can meet these foundations?
okay, so this is, I mean, the question we are all asking ourselves, and the answer to that is yes, but it's not a straightforward yes. So there is what's called the Registre de Commerce in French. I'm not sure in German and in Italian, but every canton has its own commercial registry where you can look at all the registered entities. You can put in foundation in the search bar and then look at all the registered foundations. Will that actually give a good representation of the philanthropic giving? Not for sure. And it would be a very tedious task to do, but it's a good start, especially if you have some sort of knowledge or some sort of thought of where you're going. The forums to meet the foundations, so there's a few forums. There's the Swiss Foundation and the Swiss Fundraising forums. And I would actually suggest going, because it's so relationship based and the thematics tend to change. There are a lot of international events with international actors that happen on a yearly basis. And we're talking about at least 1 or 2 a month. There is one about, just next to me, one about AI that happens, AI for Good, that it's a lot about education, a lot about technology. And then these kinds of conferences, when they're close to the UN or close to the center in Zurich, usually tend to bring most of the actors in the space. So that goes back to a bit to kind of looking at the scope. So there's a possibility to look at who's going to attend these conferences, as well as the possibility of interacting with them, whether it is digitally or whether it is in person. So it does require a bit more digging and going a bit more one by one. I would suggest finding someone, a person that has a sort of standing, whether it's with a foundation or with a similar organization, building a relationship with them, and then slowly growing the network. Because privacy and discretion is really big. So it's not unheard of that foundations will tell, you cannot say that you've talked to us, you cannot put our logos on your site, etc. So it's a closed club in that sense, but it's not unreachable. It's just you need to make it known that you're willing to put in the relationship work and you're willing to build a relationship with them.
Great, thanks, Lior. Question from Helen. Do you see any trends related to restricted and unrestricted funding? And how popular are animal welfare causes?
That's a good question. Animal welfare can, depending on how you structure it, can go easily under the biodiversity and environmental causes. And in that sense, you see a lot of animal welfare organizations or foundations that kind of work in that thematic. Unrestricted versus restricted, it's a really big question. I think depends on the level of foundations. If we're looking at the big, institutional foundations, they tend to go more restricted at the beginning, but unrestricted funding to a degree. So yes, there is a lot of unrestricted funding, but those are, as we all know, it's what we all strive for, and it's the hardest to get to. But they do have a bit of a middle ground that it's restricted, but to a degree. So there's like a thematic, there's a general direction, there's a framework, but it's not so much to the detail. And I think that's why it's so much about knowing the person and not just the organization or the brand, because they don't want to spend their time on all the little details of the projects. They want to trust you and give you the money to run with it. So it's not always completely unrestricted, but it's within a sort of framework. So it does have a lot of leeway to move within it.
Great. And from Maureen, is the ZEWO label a strong condition for trust?
No. It's not a condition. I wouldn't say it's a condition at all. I think, we can talk again in a year and then check, but at the moment, I also don't quite know the ZEWO label. I don't quite know how to pronounce that one, but that label is not as pronounced and widespread. So they're also in a place where they're building their credibility. So I wouldn't look at it. Also, I think it's quite of an expensive process as well, but I wouldn't look at it as any condition at all.
Great. Then I see that we have a question here saying, We're established as a not-for-profit Swiss chapter of a large foundation in India. Setting it up wasn't a challenge, but getting the visibility is. So the question is, does Chapel York help us get into the inner circle of donors that would be interested in eliminating classroom hunger in India? I will say, so Chapel York does offer international fundraising services, so we can help with that. But I would be curious to hear your thoughts, Lior, on what is the process in getting into that inner circle? Because it sounds like with the kind of discretion and cultural aspects of philanthropy in Switzerland, it might be one of those things that you really have to take a long view as far as the time frame in building in that access.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, and if you talk with the specialist within our fundraising team at Chapel in York, that kind of specialize within Switzerland, there will be a generalized approach, but there will also be an approach to locate linchpin people. So not specifically people that are on foundations or part of foundations, but are within a network, or people that sit on many boards. So it is about, doing a lot of research and finding the right people to then go connect, build a relationship with, to then open. But basically, why is it so much? They will put their own reputation on the line while bringing you into the circle. So that's what happens. You need to find someone who you build a relationship that has interest in your cause, because there's a lot of philanthropy here. So a lot of people have a lot of interest. Got to build that trust, and then they will put their own reputation to bring you in. Now, it can sound large, but it is how it works. So people enter all the time. So it's not something that can't happen. It's just a different approach, and it does take longer because human relationships take longer. It's possible to apply, and then maybe by chance there is a foundation that works more on applying, and you get a grant, and then through building that relationship, you can enter more. But to tap into the billions we're talking about, the real meat of philanthropy, just understanding that we're looking more long-term, and we're looking on building relationship with people. And I'm going to say again, people and not brands. We can transfer people to brands, but it is important for us also, as we work in nonprofit, who is that person that will be the connection, and who is that person that will carry that? Because brands can go on, but if you don't have a lot of reputation within Switzerland, it's a people first kind of place.
That's very helpful, Lior. Thank you. I saw there's one question about the fee structure if you're working with Chapel York as an intermediary. So I've put a link to our Global Family Foundations page on our website in the chat. So if you're interested in learning more, all the information can be there. It really depends on the level of service that you would like. We have different service levels depending on how extensive of a service you want. But we really try to offer options that can meet a variety of budgets. Particularly if you're just getting started out, there's, the more conservative investment in having a fund versus if you know that you've got a well-established group of donors and are expecting large gifts, and there's higher levels of service as well. So let me see. Lior, are there any other international events that you would recommend to attend or keep an eye out for?
Well, it's hard to say without, context or subject or kind of area. I think there is a way to look for, I would say maybe the easiest, not that it's easy, but the easiest way is to look for either really big international actors that work in the same area as you, that have offices there, and most do. I mean, from all the IUCN and UNHR and the WWF and the ICRC, they're all here, and many, many more. That list of acronyms is really long. Or look for a partner that is an organization that you know of that is well situated within Switzerland, and then follow them and see where they go. And then just, that's where you need to go, and just see where they all meet. So because it's a personal relationship place, there are quite a few times to meet throughout the year, and most of the events are yearly. So just it depends, if it's human rights, if it's education, if it's and also there's like under it, if it's education and sustainability, if it's this and that. So it's a long list.
And thinking of the different areas, as you were just referring to, Mimi has asked if you can please say a few words about higher education fundraising within Switzerland and what the culture for that is like.
So first of all, it is one of the top 5 as it came out within areas which are kind of giving funding to within entirely of Switzerland, as done with a study by the Philanthropy Center in Geneva and in Zurich. In terms of, just understand the questions, in terms of the culture, they are giving to it. It is mostly structured as not grants, the word is eluding me, as scholarships or specific kind of research grants. But those are usually very flexible, large agreements that can have very differentiating content. So the fact that we think it's X doesn't mean that it only has to be X. So there is much of a market in here, and there is a culture of giving. So it's, again, one of the top 5 areas of giving, and it's more about finding the right partners within it that are looking to give in those areas.
Okay, and then we've got 2 more questions. One is, how prevalent is the role of Swiss wealth managers in helping high net worth individuals manage and direct their philanthropy? Do a lot of high net worth individuals tend to work with their own wealth managers through like their banks or advisors? And this is someone who's currently in contact with a donor who has a personal trust with a major investment bank. So certainly understand the context for why they would be asking, is this the norm? Is this, or is this an exception?
So this is the norm, and hopefully, so as you know, every relationship can have positive or negatives, but if you do get as an entrance point to build a relationship with the wealth managers, yes, Swiss people use wealth managers, and it's actually growing. The private bank of Pictet, which is a really big private bank, had almost doubled, if not tripled, their wealth management services within the last year. So I wouldn't say it's the biggest thing, but it's an upward trend. So actually getting with wealth managers to know you, to build that relationship with them, is also a way to reach high net worth individuals or foundations. It's interesting because there is also a bit of a culture that sometimes high net worth individuals will either go with their managers, wealth managers, or they will kind of shop around, and some will just open a foundation with a name. And sometimes they're not long-term foundations even. They will have 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 million, and they will give it until it runs out, and they will close. So it's a bit of sometimes it's just like a pet project or those kinds of things. So really having people in that area is helpful, and it is growing. It's not everyone has it, It's not prevalent in terms of I've seen everyone use them, but it's becoming significant.
Thank you. And related to this, we had the last question that we have is, how do Swiss donors position themselves when it comes to the location of aid?
Yeah, so within aid, it's a huge question, right? And and depends on, you know, the specific international news of that specific day. But we say it does go to high conflict areas and areas of
Well, this is
crisis.
also this 5 and 8.
Someone is talking? Someone wants to say something? Okay. But it doesn't mean that it's just that. So you'll have more institutionalized foundations or foundations that have run for a while that take an interest in specific locations globally. Some have literally a list of 5 countries that's where they work. And they're not specifically like really obviously related. It's just a list of countries. And some move with whatever is kind of they feel is more pushing and more urgent at the moment. The entire area of aid is very developed, and there's a lot of international organizations or standard organizations that kind of coalition organizations that organize the area, and following them and where they're working and how they're working can also help inform on where the trends are now and where the trends will be in a few months, etc.
Great. Well, thank you, Lior. That's all the questions that we had. But I would encourage you all, thank you for being with us today. If you think of additional questions you'd like to ask, please reach out to us at any time. You can contact me, you can contact Lior, you can contact Nancy. We're here to be resources for you. Of course, you can visit the Chapel in York website if you want to learn more about how we can help you with your Swiss fundraising, whether that's helping you in receiving the gifts or helping you raise the funds. If there's anything else that we can do to be supportive, we are here as resources. International fundraising and philanthropy is our specialty. It's what we've been doing for over 25 years now. It's all that we do. So we are certainly here to share our expertise and knowledge with you, and we invite you to take advantage of that. Thank you all, and we hope to see you on our next webinar.
Thank you.